the other because they're going to be quite large images if you prefer, instead of having me up in the corner, but that's up to you. The second disclaimer is, like I mentioned, this is a different type of talk for me. I'm a scientist, I'm not a historian, so if I have some faux pas in how to present historical information, I apologize in advance if there's any historians in the audience. Okay, so after these disclaimers, jumping into things, understanding why we care about history and science and can be summarized by this quote, "Standing on the shoulders of giants." And if you haven't heard this quote before, what it means is that all the discoveries that we make today in science are all based on previous discoveries of the scientists that came before us. And the most familiar expression of this phrase in English, particularly, this phrase developed in the 12th century, but the most familiar expression is attributed to Sir Isaac Newton in the 1600s, where he said, "If I have seen further is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And this is quite appropriate being in the physics department, since Isaac Newton is, I think, the father of physics and classical mechanics in many different areas of physics, but also appropriate based on the physics building at Case Western Reserve University. So this is a picture of Rockefeller Building that I'm sitting in right now, that was built in 1905. And in this image right here, this is where my office, this is where I am sitting right now. And if you see, I'm not just standing on the shoulders of giants, I'm sitting under the names of some giants as well. And in particular, Newton right here. So all across the top of Rockefeller Building are the names of physicists who made important discoveries before 1905 when the building was built. This is great to relate the physics department here to the saying of standing on the shoulders of giants. But the one issue that I do have with the giants of science is that they can be hard to relate to. In particular, again, relating to Newton, he had to live through a pandemic as well, just as we have been in quarantining and dealing with the pandemic over the past year or so. And I don't know if you saw this article that was trending at the start of the pandemic. If you see here, you can see my mouse. This was published in March of 2020. When Newton was in his dealing with a pandemic, he was studying at Cambridge. And when he was quarantining, what he was able to do with his free time, he was able to develop early calculus, and he was able to establish some of his theories on optics. And I have to say, that's great for Newton, but I will definitely say that in my time during the pandemic, I was watching more Netflix and not really founding a whole area of mathematics or physics. So while we look to our past, I also think it's important to look to the scientists who have come before us that we can also relate to, and also that can inspire us, that may not be complete geniuses or might be hundreds of years removed from us. And this brings me to the thesis of my talk here, in that I really believe that we can tell stories through local history, our personal culture, and the location around us in ways that can inspire our interest in science. And this is where I've turned to becoming inspired and finding these types of stories through the Cleveland Cultural Gardens. The Cultural Gardens, if you're not familiar, is located in Rockefeller Park in Cleveland, so it's right near Case's campus. It's through the Rockefeller Gardens, appropriately similarly named after the Rockefeller Building, and the physics department was funded by John D. Rockefeller. The Cleveland Cultural Gardens in Rockefeller Park, the park was donated by John D. Rockefeller in 1896 as part of Cleveland Centennial celebration. So the park was established in 1896, but the first cultural gardens weren't founded until 1916. So the first garden was the Shakespeare Garden that ended up becoming the British Garden, and then was followed by the Hebrew Garden in 1926, and then 33 subsequent gardens have been founded there. So you can see here a full list of the established gardens on the left, with the years listed after when they were founded, and also some of the in progress and future gardens. So the founding of the gardens in Cleveland tell the history of immigration and when people came, certain cultural groups came to the Cleveland area. So you can see the earlier gardens were more in Western Europe, followed by Eastern European locations. Later we see Asian gardens in China and India being founded, followed by the Middle East. African gardens are some of them, with the Ethiopian garden being founded, and future gardens including South America. And I'd also like to point out that there's the African American garden, Native American garden, so there's American gardens listed there as well. And if you haven't been to the Cleveland Cultural Gardens, I highly encourage you to go and visit them. They're right in our own backyard. If you work in University Circle, if you live in Glenville or University Circle or on the east side, or if you're visiting Cleveland or in the suburbs, if you're coming to visit the museums, you'll pass through these gardens. And it's not just nice views out your car window when you're driving there, but you can also walk out and explore the gardens. And if you do so, you will see that there are scientists featured in the cultural gardens. Some of them, again, big, giant names. If you go to the Italian garden with Da Vinci or Galileo, there's also some more abstract representations in the Syrian and Indian garden. More recent gardens tell broader stories or don't have as many statues. Where in the Syrian garden, they talk about the founding of language, communication, and the written alphabet. The Indian garden emphasizing Nobel Prize winners, and many statues or portraits of different scientists. And the Russian garden has the most scientists represented, as they have many of these bricks that list important scientific figures and other important figures in the Russian culture, where they have over 20 scientists represented here. And this brings me to the story that I'd like to tell you today, that has inspired my own interest in my own culture and my own interest in science as well. As that when I spent some time, I was living in University Circle and got to walk through and explore the gardens. And I went to the Slovak garden, and I'm 50% Slovak, so that's why I was paying particular interest in that garden. And the most prominent statue that's in that garden is Milan Štefánik. And I was very interested and surprised to see that it was a scientist that was represented there, that in this plaque that's shown down here is in detail on the right. The first thing that is listed is that he was an astronomer and astrophysicist, along with a patriot, statesman, and diplomat. So being a physicist, it really stood out to me that he was an astrophysicist, and I wasn't familiar with who Milan Štefánik was. So that piqued my interest, and I wanted to learn more about that and see if this is a story and someone related to my own culture that could inspire some of my own interests in science. So if you go and you search for information about Milan Štefánik, the information that mostly comes up in English is related to his involvement in World War I and his role in establishing Czechoslovakia as an independent country after World War I. So this picture comes up everywhere on Wikipedia and general Google search, which really shows him in a military role.
Peter.
Okay, with Zoom, or is there just someone unmuted? Just wanted to check. Sorry, I was getting some feedback. And the importance of his help in founding Czechoslovakia, and the importance of that for the Czech people and the Slovak people, you have to go back a little bit before World War I and understand that the Czech people were under the rule of the Austrians, and the Slovak people were under the rule of the Hungarians in the Austro-Hungarian Empire for quite a few centuries. And the Hungarians to the Slovak people, there was quite a bit of tension there, and there was some repression of the Slovak culture through the rule of the Hungarians, that Slovaks could not attend school in their own language after elementary school. They also had some, with those efforts, they even removed Slovak children from their families to be educated and raised by Hungarian families. And you can understand that this was quite a bit of tension and stress for the Slovak people. So it was very important and very pronounced that the formation of this independent state of Czechoslovakia happened after World War I. And Štefánik was quite key in this, and the fact that he was involved with the organization of Czech and Slovak soldiers in World War I. They were called the Legionnaires, and there were thousands of them fighting in World War I. And the formation of the Legionnaires and having this large group of people that had no country associated with them was key to the development of forming this independent country. So Štefánik was key in helping lead the Legionnaires, but also recruiting support from Western Europe and the allies there in France, Britain, and Italy, and also in the United States in having their support of forming this independent country. And his experiences in science, which I'll touch upon in the next slides, and the connections he made there were key to how he was able to have the right political savvy to be able to get to the support from Western Europe and the United States. And because of this role, he was named the first Minister of Defense of Czechoslovakia after the country was formed. But he was kind of forced into this military and this political role because of World War I. And prior to this, he truly is a scientist at heart. You can see in these stamps, these Slovak stamps, you can see an observatory in the background or a comment on the stamp. And when he was in the military, he was in the French military based on where he was located at and his scientific connections at the time. And when he was awarded the rank of Brigadier General, when they were pinning the stars on his lapel, he's quoted as saying, "If I could, I would exchange any of these stars that were on his uniform for the stars in the heavens." So he was truly a scientist. So that's the story that I want to focus on today, is the history of Milan Štefánik as a scientist and what contributions he made there. So getting into that, Štefánik was always interested in science from a young age, especially interested in astronomy. And he was born in 1880 in a very small town in northwest Hungary, which is now in northwest Slovakia, called Košarica. And it is truly a small town that the current day population is 403 people. So over on the left here, you can see his home where he was born and his hometown in the upper left here. And he was always looking up at the skies, admiring the stars, and he even built his own homemade telescope out of paper and would climb up on these hills to view the night sky. He would also entertain his younger sisters with stories about the stars. But to get serious about studying the stars and getting into astronomy, we have to turn to Štefánik's education. And he attended elementary school in Slovak in his hometown, but then because of the Hungarian rule, he had to attend school in Bratislava, which is now the current capital of Slovakia, and also Sopron, which is now in present-day Hungary, for high school, and attended school in the Hungarian language there. After completing high school, he then went to Prague in 1898 he went to Prague in 1898, first pursuing a career in construction engineering. And that was under pressure from his father that wanted him to get a very pragmatic and practical, normal job that he could support himself with and support the family with. But the stars were always calling him, and he couldn't stand the engineering that much, that he then transferred 2 years later in 1900 to study at Charles University in Prague, so same city. And Charles University, interesting fact, that was founded in 1385, which as an American, that seems like such an old university. And it's the longest continuously running university in Central and Eastern Europe. And there he was able to dive right into studying astronomy, studying physics, studying optics, and math. So you can see some images of Štefánik over here in the lab and studying there. So he was able to work at Charles University, and also through connections with his professors, he went to Zurich for one summer where he was able to master the art of grinding lenses. That was key to his skills in building instruments. And as an experimentalist, the fact that he had to grind and polish his own lenses, as opposed to myself now where I just open a web page and can order whatever I want, I find very impressive. So in 1904, he was awarded his PhD from Charles University, and he wrote a thesis in astrophysics. I'll emphasize the fact that he studied at university in Prague was very key to him developing an appreciation and representation for the Slavic cultures, And he also made connections to the Czech culture as well, that were important in his political interests later on forming Czechoslovakia. So after he completed his PhD, he then wanted to go all in astrophysics, and he knew he had to go and interact with the top astronomers in the world, which at that time were located in Paris. So in 1904, he moved to Paris, and very interesting as well, he moved to Paris with a letter in his pocket, a letter of reference from one of his professors at Charles University, and he moved around the University of Paris so he could start to integrate and network with the astronomers that worked at that university. And he would just have to hand over his letter of recommendation to make those connections. So for the first year, he struggled quite a bit of trying to make those connections, to polish up his French speaking. And he had to have a lot of support from his family, and even would only eat one meal a day to try to save money. But after 1 year, he integrated himself enough in the astronomy community in Paris and was introduced to Professor Jules Janssen, who was a very senior astronomer in Paris at that time. And they hit it off right away. The first time that they met, they ended up talking over their meeting for 45 minutes and met back the next day. And Janssen ended up mentoring Štefánik, and Štefánik viewed him as a second father almost, especially in the fact that Janssen supported him in his interest in astronomy versus his own father, who wanted him to go in more practical directions. So under that mentorship, he was able to obtain a position in the Moudon Astronomical Observatory in Paris. You can see this photo here on the left with one of the telescopes that they were using there. But he was also able to make expeditions and go to other observatories as well. So over here on the right, you can see that this is him going up to the Mont Blanc Observatory, so at the highest peak in Europe, where that observatory was above the cloud line, so they could have many more clear nights to make observations. So he ended up going up to the Mont Blanc Observatory 6 times total, and even one time he was there for a total of 18 days due to poor weather conditions. And when him and his scientific partner descended after those 18 days, many people were quite surprised that they survived that amount of time, because there were storms and they didn't think that they would have made it through. So when he was going up to the Mont Blanc Observatory, he was so committed that he even helped use some of his own money to bring instrumentation up to him. And always, even as with present day science, he was always trying to get funding and struggling to get funds to support his work. So in one of the books that I was reading, they were discussing that Štefánik at one time wanted to go to Spain because he, I'll touch on this later, studied the solar corona, which was only viewable during a solar eclipse. So there was a solar eclipse taking place in Spain. He wrote a grant, and this author wrote, oh, for some reason he failed to secure his own funding. But I think many of the scientists here can relate to that. But Štefánik was so devoted that he even went there himself on his own funds. So his time working in Paris and under Professor Janssen was cut short. Unfortunately, he only was able to work with him for about 3 years because Janssen was in a senior position, and due to some politics was pushed to retire at that point, and Štefánik lost his connections to continue working in Paris. But his time there, he was quite productive. He published 6 papers within about 2.5, 3 years, and was a co-author on 4 other papers, which by today's standards is very prolific as well. But he still continued to pursue studying astronomy and working in observatories. And instead of staying in Paris after this time, his connections and searches for funding through the French government ended up taking him throughout the world. So Štefánik traveled far and wide for his observations. And for example, in 1910, the French government gave him funding to set up an observatory that you can see here on the left in Tahiti. This is also Štefánik having a relaxing time, I guess, in Tahiti as well. So this observatory included 3 telescopes. It was important to observe Halley's Comet, and he once again was able to observe another solar eclipse. And this travel to Tahiti to reach there through Europe, he had to travel through the United States, where once again, his travel for science ended up having him make connections that benefited him in his political role later on. That as he traveled through the United States, he met with Slovak groups in New York, in Chicago, on his way to San Francisco, where he then sailed to Tahiti. Upon his return from Tahiti, he was made a member of the French Academy of Sciences because of establishing this observatory and also making key observations of constellations for the French Navy, actually, that are important, the different constellations he could observe in the Southern Hemisphere. So he really did a lot of work for the French government. One speaker said that he was a pride of France, that he was taking the French flag throughout the world, despite being Slovak, and doing some great science for them. So his travels also took him to the Sahara, Turkestan, Algeria, India, Tibet, Bolivia, and Peru, all over the world to make these observations, mainly following where solar eclipses were occurring. So all of these travels took place between that period between, I guess, 1906 and 1914, and his pursuit of following more adventures was cut short by World War I. So in 1914, he was granted French citizenship and enrolled in the French Legion, and he was transferred to their new aviation branch, where he used his skills in astronomy and meteorology, which astronomers were experts in at that time, to help out their aviation services there. I want to touch on some of the details that was the trajectory of Štefánik's scientific career, and touch a little bit on what he was studying. In addition to mapping constellations, a lot of his work was focused on studying the solar corona. So not coronavirus, corona meaning this ring or the crown type shape that you can observe. So the coronavirus, you know, is a spherical virus, here being the spherical outer edge of the sun. And trying to make observations of the solar corona is only possible during a solar eclipse, which I've pictured here on the left. And if you were lucky during, I guess it was a couple, maybe 2017, where there was a solar eclipse, and I think we're having a total solar eclipse maybe in 2024, maybe the astronomers in the audience can correct me, that they're quite rare. So that's what led to many of Štefánik's travels. And what he was interested in was understanding the solar corona by understanding what colors were present in that the sun emitted that you could only observe during this corona. So he was an expert in spectroscopy, which means separating light based on the different colors or wavelengths that you can see. So this is a modern day spectrograph here, where the solar light would enter in here, and either using gratings or a prism, you separate the white light into the different colored components that are there. So based on the different colors that are present in the sun that you can observe just on the edge, you can understand what elements, what elements make up the sun at that point. So this is a cartoon here from XKCD, but it shows here the Roy G. Biv spectrum. So this is the visible light that we can see going from red, lower energy, to high energy in the blue, or again, the blue region. And you can see that these specific lines that can be observed in the spectrum of the sun tell us that there's calcium present, iron, hydrogen, oxygen, and the like. And the joke here with this XKCD comment is that the lines that are unassigned relate to the giant sunglasses that you see in cartoons. So that's just a little joke on the side. So Štefánik studied what elements are only present at the edge of the sun, and he was working on developing very key high-end spectrographic instruments with his skills in grinding and designing, and also being able to construct spectrophotographs, which are special instruments that can take a picture of the sun at one color only, to again understand the makeup of the elements that are present in the sun. So that's some scientific details about his research. But I also like to note that even after he had to become involved with the military and politics. Because of World War I, his scientific interests continued. So I mentioned he used his scientific training in the aviation division, but also there was a story in this book that I was able to get some information of, where it was quoting a captain that worked under Štefánik after he was a general in the French army. And they were traveling to Siberia in 1918 to meet up with some of those legionnaires. And Štefánik's in his role of being a general in the military. So he has these people coming up to him, his subordinates reporting on shipments of materials, about the status of food in certain areas, about the morale of the different soldiers, and they're all giving these different reports while he's sitting in a train car, and they're all giving these reports. And at the end of the meeting, everybody's still there, and Štefánik takes a moment and he's like, okay, I think we've covered everything, but before you guys go, I actually need you guys to get me a piece of silica quartz that's at least 12 centimeters long. I also need you to get me some metal that I can use, because I need to create, I want to construct my next spectrometer. So even while he's leading all these things, all in the midst of war and all the politics and events taking place on him, he's still thinking about the science that he wants to do. And this image over here shows his apartment in Paris, where you can see even in his personal belongings, he has his own telescope. So that stood out to me, that he truly, like I mentioned at the start, he truly was a scientist at heart. And the unfortunate news is, after World War I ended, and also after Czechoslovakia was declared an independent country, Štefánik was never able to get back into his science or see the country that he helped create flourish. That he died early at the age of 38 in 1919. That he was flying back after meeting with some legionnaires that were stationed in Italy after the war subsided, and he was flying from Italy to Bratislava, to his homeland. And in the airplane with 3 other Italians, they were flying while the weather was quite poor, and their airplane ended up crashing. And there was some conspiracies and at that time and contention, but I think it's been resolved that it was just an accident due to weather. So he was never able to take his role in the government or get back involved in his science at all. So he was posthumously the first Minister of Defense and held that position for a year. And you can see here the monument that was built in Bratislava, his tomb after that crash. So for the Slovak people, this was quite a huge blow, and the news after his passing spread throughout the world, and it especially became important to the Slovaks that were in Cleveland. Cleveland has a large Slovak population, many of the immigrants starting to come to Cleveland in the late 1800s. And when they learned about Štefánik's passing, they immediately set to creating a memorial and a monument in his memory. And it actually was the first monument for Štefánik in the entire world. So this image here of his tomb that's in Bratislava and the monument to Štefánik there was completed in 1927. The Cleveland statue was installed in 1924, so it was the first one. And it's really a testament to the organization of the Slovaks in the United States, but particularly in Cleveland, that there was a lot of debate and some drama about this monument should have been in Washington, D.C. or in New York City, but the Cleveland Slovaks were quite vocal, and they did a lot of the fundraising to create this statue. So you can see wreath laying here with some of the men and organizers that helped raise those funds. And the original location of the statue is shown here. So I'm talking about the Cleveland Cultural Gardens, but actually some of you may remember that this statue was actually not in the Cultural Gardens for some time, that its original location was actually at the corner of what is now Jephthah and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. So right below the hill where the parking lot of the Cleveland Museum of Art is. And one of the prime organizers shown here in the middle of the image, John Pankush, he really wanted that statue to stay in that location near Wade Park, because he was saying hundreds or thousands of people pass by it every single day. And I'll say back in the 1920s and 1930s, I will say, yes, that was true and people could view it and appreciate it. I will say more recently, when people are flying by it, trying in their cars going 40 miles per hour, people pass by it but may not have understood it. So I'm kind of glad that it ended up being moved to the Slovak Cultural Gardens in 2013, despite the garden being founded in 1932, I believe. Okay, and I just saw the chat information. I'll address those a bit later. So you can see the statue in its present location here in the Slovak garden. And if we look at the details of the statue itself, on this slide, you can see a closer up view. The statue was constructed actually in 1922 as another interesting side fact. It was shipped to New York and it was stuck in New York for quite a bit because the train companies thought it was too large to be fit under some of the bridges to get to Cleveland. So there were quite a few letters going back and forth. And then once it got to Cleveland, they didn't have the funds yet for the pedestal for it to sit on. So that's why it wasn't installed until 1924. But the statue itself has a few symbols present. And I'd also first like to note that Štefánik here is shown not in a military uniform. They actually show him more in an aviator uniform. There's no badges, there's no medals on his coat at all. And you can see him holding the binoculars there, both in his interest in astronomy, but also his role in aviation as well. The symbols that are present include these eagle wings that are wrapped around the bottom that symbolize the plane crash that killed Štefánik. He also has these mountains here that represent the mountain ranges that are present in Slovakia. And then on the back, which I wasn't aware of until recently, there's a linden tree, which is a national tree of Slovakia. And there's actually 2 linden trees from Slovakia planted in that garden. So those are the symbols that are present there. It's recognized by the Cleveland Museum of Art and also the Smithsonian as a monument with historical and artistic worth as well. That's the story. That's one story from the Cleveland Cultural Gardens that I wanted to tell you about today. And it's really walking through the Slovak garden and seeing the statue of a scientist that I wasn't aware of is what inspired me in realizing that there's lots of stories within the Cleveland Cultural Gardens itself. And I'll say that personally, Štefánik's story inspires me in multiple ways. One, as a scientist, I'm an experimentalist. I do spectroscopy, I work with optics, and I find it quite impressive what Štefánik was able to achieve with his instrumentation and being able to construct those telescopes and spectrometers that he was able to observe the sun with. I also have to say it really inspires me that he used his career and his trajectory in science and the connections he made there to also make a political impact as well as a citizen of the world, as a Slovak as well, and to make and found this new country. And it really touches upon that scientists can't just work in the lab alone, that we're citizens of the world as well and of our local community, and we have a role to play in impacting this world as well. I'll also say I am younger than 38 years old, so I also found it impressive of what he could accomplish in his life and made me inspired in being like, I don't think I could accomplish that much, but like that you can make such a large impact in that short amount of time since his life was cut short. And then finally, as a Clevelander, as a Slovak, I found it very inspiring how my ancestors before me came together to create the statue to help support the founding of Czechoslovakia as well, that the Slovaks here sent quite a bit of funds and support during World War I as well, and helped sign that Declaration of Independence for the founding of that country, which is now Czechia and Slovakia. That I think we not only stand on the shoulders of the giants that come before us in science, but also in the culture and the people and the fathers before us as well. So that's the story from the garden that I wanted to tell you about today. But I also have some questions for you before I wrap up. And that Štefánik is still quite a giant as well, I would say. Maybe I didn't solve the question that I posed at the start of my talk. That I still think there's quite a bit of room of trying to understand what other stories from history and what other people that came before us can inspire our interest in science and other important areas. So if you are a scientist, what stories from history have inspired you? What other stories could inspire you? I'd also like to highlight that it's very important to think about the stories that not only inspire the people that are already here and were interested enough to go on this call, but what about the people that aren't here that could inspire them and relate to their own cultures? And related to that, there's many statues in the cultural gardens that are highlighting the big names, but what statues are missing from the gardens today? And related to this, I mean, here's some examples that we've seen from popular culture recently, such as the movie Hidden Figures that highlighted Katherine Johnson and her role in the NASA and early efforts in space there, or Henrietta Lacks, whose cell line, the HeLa cell line, has led to so many discoveries in biology, so many discoveries related to drug development as well. And hopefully in the future, I'll be able to tell a story of science related to my personal scientific hero, Rosalind Franklin, who was key in discovering the structure of DNA, who I think has gotten quite a bit of recognition now, but at the time was overlooked by Watson, I guess the bigger names at the time, Watson and Crick, and the discovery of the structure of DNA. So with that, I'll go back to my original image that we can also update some of these names that not only the known big names like Newton in science inspire us and should be on buildings, but here underneath where my office is, Štefánik has inspired me, but what names could inspire the next generation or the new and different representation in physics and the scientists, and what stories can we tell about them? So I thank you guys for listening. I'd like to make sure to acknowledge Father Brunovsky, who's at Benedictine High School, who provided me with a lot of the information about Štefánik's political background and also many of those awesome images he had. And also the Cleveland Public Library. I got to spend some time in their reserve collection because there's not many English resources about Štefánik. So I got to read this book from 1924 in their very cool reserve section that has like a bunch of chessboards, and I felt very Hogwarts, like Hogwarts with all the romantic bookshelves and stuff, and I couldn't check that book out. So I'm glad that they had that resource, and I thank them for their efforts. So thank you for your time. And I also want to emphasize my contact information is, well, I guess my website's there. My email is just lydia.kisley@case.edu. And if you have some answers to those questions or would like to get involved with telling some stories of science through the gardens related to your own culture or other gardens that interest you, I'd really be interested in hearing from you.
Since everyone's muted, I'm clapping on everyone's behalf. Thank you, Lydia, for telling a great story of a scientist who probably most of us hadn't necessarily heard of, but who clearly played a huge role in his country's founding. And let's see, we don't have a lot of questions in the chat, I don't think. We have someone saying that the Curies and Feynman were inspiring to them.
Yeah, but she asked for people to say who inspired them. So
right.
She has questions for you.
Right. Yeah. So we should let people unmute if you want to put your hand up, I guess is the easiest way. Because we can't unmute everyone, I don't think.
Well, they can unmute themselves though.
Yeah, I think so.
To speak, or they can put up their hand, which can be done under reactions. And one of the things is to raise your hand. How about you, Joe Lamanna? Who are your scientific idols, inspirations. Oh, you're on mute. I
think we have to ask them to unmute. 'Cause
I asked him to unmute. There he is.
There we are. Yeah, otherwise I would have to just talk with my hands, which is
we're
work over.
Italian, it's okay.
Yeah, so you know, you have Da Vinci there, you know. He's inspiring. But I was thinking of someone who lived in Cleveland for a while, was Edward Morley. We have a building in his name.
Yeah.
But we don't have him. We don't have a statue of him, you know. So that would be kind of fun.
Yeah, I think there could be a whole nother series of stories of science on Case's campus as well, with all the names that, yeah, are present on campus.
And the other one is Torricelli. Nice Italian. We could have a nice, you know, we invented the
Pasta?
barometer, you know.
Pasta Torricelli?
No, Torricelli. So those were, he also died young, by the way. He was 38 or 39 when he died. So that was just at the time, 1640, something like that, just at the time that science was rising in the Lunar Society was just being born, things like that.
So he was another astro person. He was another astronomer. Sorry that I'm not as
He was an astronomer. He invented the barometer. So he
okay.
looked at the barometric.
Like Tor.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we actually in 2005 for the 100th anniversary of the building tried to organize a national conference with APS, the American Physical Society, to give us the next set of names to go around the building, right? Because if you look at those names, one of the things you'll notice is, first of all, they're I'm going to say they're all white males. I'm pretty sure that's true. And you'd probably want to add some names that aren't white males, like Madame Curie, right? And Rosalind Franklin, and but somehow I'm trying to remember, that never quite got off the ground. The APS didn't quite buy into it, but it would be interesting to do because you know, and some of the names there I'm not sure we would still put up in the same way. It's interesting to see how they would change. So
yeah, whenever I think a name should be on the building, obviously, like I can't say if they came after 1905, but where Strosacker is, we have one building that got built up against our building. So I'm always like, oh, I bet one of those names is back there. So that's.
Yeah, somewhere we have the list of the names that are back there. We should find out what they are. How about Serpil? Do you have, I see Serpil online. Do you have any names?
The scientific heroes.
Well, I'm not a scientist, but I do remember reading a lot about Marie Curie. But I have to say, like when I was, this is recent vintage, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer, but when I was in high school, I read a lot of stuff about Don Johanson and ended up being an anthropology major in school. So that was a little bit inspiring for me.
And I think we need names from people who aren't as well. So it's important.
I thought I saw one of our graduate students maybe posting here. Oh, I see. Juan Lloyd Powell, you had a couple of names. Do you want to share those? And why?
I think they listed the two female scientists that are represented in the garden. So there's Marie Curie. So I think Sudesh mentioned that was someone who inspired him, and she's represented. And then Mileva Marish, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. So those are the two women that are represented in the gardens. And I met with the director of the cultural gardens, and she said it'd be great to have some more in there too. So that's recognized.
Hi, Lydia. This is Juan Lloyd
Yeah.
Powell. I sent that message about the other two, but I had sent you a private note about what we did in the garden back in 2019 for One World Day.
Mhm.
One of the activities we did was painted rocks to kind of hide all over the garden so that the festival goers can just do that. And we hit about 300 rocks. But the group that we're involved in, there's a lot of scientists. So for a fun thing, we made a set of solar system rocks, starting with the sun. We painted all the planets, painted the symbols on them, and we hid them among the garden. But we hid the sun in the Polish garden, right under Copernicus's statue, of course. But then we went out further away and it's like, okay, we have to stay within the confine of the gardens. So we put Pluto in the Chinese garden, the furthest one away. Then we have to backward extrapolate all the distances and hit the other rocks amongst everything. So, I mean, it was just a fun thing. We didn't have to do it that way, but might as well, right?
Yeah, very accurate way. Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are they still there, or did they like? Did they?
Some of the rocks have been found. Not all of them have been found. We asked if they find it, they put it up, hashtag One World AOWD. But I know that the moon rock was found, Jupiter was found, and Saturn was found. I don't know about, and Sun was found. I don't know about the others.
And were people meant to leave them there, or did they take them once they found them?
Well, you can take them and rehide them somewhere else. It's just a fun activity, but
Right.
that, we had the moon, we had satellites, rockets, you name it, anything alien related, we had it painted. So yeah, that was fun.
Sounds fun. Now, yeah, I agree with Sudash. Like, I'm interested in finding those now, or taking a look.
You can GPS locate them and have people.
So evidently people are unable to unmute themselves. I'm looking.
They have to put their hands up, I think.
Okay. Vince wanted to say something. Try it now, Vince.
Now, okay. Yeah, if you're looking for a famous person, Harry Goldblatt, the pathologist who discovered the renin-angiotensin system, he received the Nobel Prize for that. It's basically the same system that leads COVID-19 to bind to the ACE2 receptor. So he was a member of our department in pathology, and then when I joined the department, I occupied his office, actually, his lab. So standing on the shoulders of giant, according to Lydia, is a true statement.
Sometimes standing on their chair.
So
Yeah.
What a fun story.
yeah.
We might have room for one or two, might have time for one or two more.
So there was a question about number 13 in your background, Lydia.
Yes, this is Frank Ryan's Sports Illustrated cover. So good eye for Chris Barnes. So I have this because Frank Ryan, I'm a Browns fan. He quarterbacked the Browns to their last championship. He also has a PhD from Rice University, where I got my PhD. So I got this before I had my PhD, and I used it as inspiration because I was like, I could do 1 out of 2 of those things. I don't think I'll quarterback the Browns to a championship. And then after I came here, I found out that he taught at Case. So I've done 2 out of 3 things that Frank Ryan has done. So.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's great.
I'm just going to put a thing up here because we were asked how to support the Institute. So we're happy to let you know how to support the Institute. If you go to origins.case.edu, on the upper right, there's a box marked Give to the ISO. So please feel free.
Great. Thank you again, Lydia, for a fascinating story, a fantastic talk. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday for Cyrus Taylor and Chris Haufa at 6 o'clock. Remember, you do have to register for that. If you don't have all the details, you can go to origins.case.edu and click on Origin Science Scholars, the current series, to get to the links to register for that. Please do try to do that well before Tuesday evening. So thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the summer as long as it lasts, this current iteration. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And we'll look forward to having Lydia back for lots more talks.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody. It's really acting odd tonight.
Well, yeah, there must have been a change in the defaults.
Yeah, but
And
I
the
mean,
thing is, once we muted them, they couldn't unmute without us clicking on them.
yeah, and also just now, trying to remove people, it didn't want to do it.
Oh, I had no trouble.
Okay, well, maybe it was keeping up with you instead. So I had to click them 2 and 3 times. In fact, it could be that they weren't letting me do it at all. It could be that you got to them, and that's when they disappeared.
Right. Huh, odd, because you're the host and I'm the co-host, but
Yeah, we had several co-hosts because I was